and welcome to Waters Landing Elementary School. Hi, everybody there in the cafeteria. Thank you so much to my hosts for having me here. I love talking about parenting. I love talking to parents, and this is such a treat to be here. If if you have a PTA where you want this talk or one of my others, you can write to me through my practice. I do complimentary PTA meetings because this is, something I enjoy and really believe in. So you can always write to me and just ask if I happen to have space on my schedule. We are going to have some discussion time at the end, because I have two parenting experts who are here with me. And so at the end, we're going to have time for all of us to have a conversation. The only thing I would say is we can't give specific advice. I can't give like psychological advice, over the internet. It's considered unethical. So if you have questions, I can give general information, but unfortunately it's unethical for me to give very specific information, but we are happy to point you towards resources if we possibly can. So now I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. Okay. If you put the face panels, you can get rid of the face panels, so you don't have to look at my 50-year-old face all night. If you put the face panels on the lower right-hand side, I designed the slides so that the lower right-hand quadrant will be clear, and so you will have an unobstructed view. So let me go ahead and do from the beginning. Come on, computer. There we go. So this is Positive Communication, Positive Discipline, Tools for 21st Century Parents. I am a 21st century parent. I have two boys still at home. I have one, my 31-year-old stepson is grown up and married. I am a very enthusiastic parent of public school kids here in Montgomery County. I think this is an amazing county. I love the resources. I love the diversity. I love that my kids have passionate teachers and go to school with people from all over the world. What could be better? So a bit about me. I am, in addition to being a mom, I'm also a licensed psychologist at Rebecca Resnick and Associates. I specialize in testing, and I also we do some advocacy, but one of the things I really love is just sharing all the information that I've learned through the years about parenting. So let me go ahead and advance. So first off, let me just say that parenting in this particular time, parenting in 2023 is really hard. And every time you read the newspaper or a website or anything about parenting, it's so negative about us as parents. And I think that's really wrong. That message that we're bad parents and that there's something wrong with this generation of kids, whether it's Gen Z or Gen Alpha, that just isn't true. Older generations have been saying bad things about younger generations ever since Socrates. So let's think about why it is so hard to be parenting now in 2023. We are dealing with problems that our parents didn't deal with. And I can say this as somebody who raised a young person who is now 31 years old. My stepson is a millennial. So when I was raising him, starting when he was about 6 years old, all of the problems that my husband and I had were familiar, right? We talked about TV time. We talked about whether he was eating too much junk food. We talked about how he was going to get his driver's license. We didn't really have issues with cell phones because he had a flip phone. And if he wanted to text, it took him 3 punches of every button to text one letter. Yes, he had video games, but they were on one console. They didn't go into his bedroom with him. So this is a really different time. And if you're feeling stressed, it is not because you are a bad parent. I promise you, you're up, at the time of night when you are probably exhausted to talk about parenting. I promise you are not a bad parent. So parenting in 2023, we have school shootings. I remember putting my kids on the elementary school bus, and you know how you do the kiss and you wave to them as they go off to school. every single day since the Sandy Hook massacre, it has gone through my mind as my kids have gone off to school. Are they going to be safe? Is something bad going to happen to them? My mother didn't worry about that. She sent us off to school and she was very confident that, everything was going to be fine. Maybe she worried about a fight or, a food fight in the cafeteria, but it was not, she never worried, was I going to get shot at school? Current events right now are awful. And it's not like this is a new thing, but we have current events and TikTok videos and media streaming at our children all the time. And it's become almost impossible to block and protect our children from really scary information. Whoever you are, whatever you look like, whatever your ethnicity, whatever your ethnic group, whatever your language, whatever your religion, are you part of the LGBTQIA community? In the past few years, you have been able to turn on the television or pull up a website and seen people like you being murdered just because of who they are. This is a whole new ball game where we can't just turn off the TV like our parents could. We have cyberbullying now that is starting younger and younger, and the younger kids get phones, the more that they are exposed to all of the wonderful things on the internet, but also they can be bullied 24/7, and it's very hard to protect our kids from all of the bad people out there who want to hurt them, exploit them, sell things to them. Screen time is a whole new issue. Like I said before, when I wanted to limit my stepson's screen time, we would turn off the TV and there you go. Or we would turn off the computer. It was very easy. But nowadays, especially for our kids who did online learning, screen time has really fallen apart in a lot of households. Before the pandemic, I had very strict rules about screen time and computer use, and all of us had to make a lot of changes for online instruction. This younger generation of kids is growing up with screens around them all the time. Every time you go to a restaurant now, you will see families sitting around the table and every member of the family is on a screen. So kids don't even really have time just to be with their parents where there's not a screen in front of their face. And even worse, when the parents don't have a screen in front of their face. So again, this is a very stressful type of environment for our kids to be coming up in. We also have a lot of rise in perfectionism. Ever since 2005, we have had a real uptick in pressure for our kids to be perfect, to go to highly selective colleges, to have like perfect looking parents, perfect looking house. And of course, that's not realistic, but it sells ads and it sells magazines and it sells all sorts of things. And at the same time, it makes all of us miserable. We have very serious psychopathology now at younger and younger ages. When I first started as a special education teacher, this was back in the late 90s and early 2000s, we associated really severe psychopathology like suicidality, self-harm. We associated that with the older years of adolescence. Those were like high school level problems. And now we have kids who are on maybe their second or third psychiatric hospitalization at very young ages, sometimes like 11 and 12 years old, 13 years old. So all of the big psychological problems that we used to think of as not happening until much later are happening much earlier. We also have, marijuana legalized in Maryland now. And on the one hand, I'm happy about that because I didn't like the fact that the marijuana laws were not racially and ethnically just. You had people who were, having their lives ruined for something that really didn't hurt other people. Okay. But the problem is, of course, now that it's legal, kids are going to have access. And we know that kids who develop severe substance abuse problems tend to do it right around age 11. When there's more marijuana around and such strong marijuana, younger and younger kids are going to try it. And what we know from this new heavy duty, super strong marijuana with high concentrations of THC, for some kids, it is going to cause psychotic episodes. and not necessarily just one psychotic episode that goes away after the marijuana leaves their system. But for some kids, this is creating long-term problems with psychotic episodes and mood regulation because they have a genetic vulnerability. And of course, for all of us, there's a lot of uncertainty about the future. If you think about The Simpsons, for example, I like putting Simpsons pictures in my talks. The Simpsons were a classic 80s family where you had one member of the family who was working. Homer had a high school diploma, but he had a skill and he was able to support an entire family and buy a house and have a car and go on vacation. And nowadays, we don't know what our kids are going to need in order to just make ends meet. So the economic uncertainty is causing a lot of stress to trickle down through our parents, through our teachers, to our kids. So if you are stressed out as a parent, this whole slide is about there's lots of very good reasons why. But here's the good news. I think this generation of kids is great in a lot of ways. Don't believe the media saying that this generation of kids is unmotivated or lazy or snowflakes. This generation of kids cares more about social justice than any generation that has ever been. They care about saving the planet. They don't just recycle, they actually really care about leaving the world a better place. They're much more accepting of diversity and disability and neurodiversity. And, the old stigma around how bad it was to have a mental health problem is finally starting to really go away. So again, there's so much good news about this generation. So in terms of now talking about how do we help kids? How do we manage their behavior? How do we parent? One thing I often see in my office is that parents get stuck being reactive, right? Something bad happens and parents react to it. And that's how we are as humans, right? We're not particularly good at thinking ahead, especially when we're stressed and we need to get a lot of stuff done. So the thing to know is that when kids feel right, they act right. None of us drives aggressively or yells at our spouse or, says bad words when we're feeling at peace inside. When we feel settled inside, when we feel happy, when we feel respected, this is when we are our best selves. And if it's that way for us as adults, it's even more that way for kids. Remember, when they feel right, they act right. So behavior tells us a lot about what's going on with them. When we have undesirable behavior, when we have kids who are being aggressive, kids who can't get their work done, kids who seem lazy, they're telling us something isn't right with them. And as adults, the more we can listen, the better. So what helps kids feel right? Let's talk about what we can put in place to be proactive instead of reactive. If you remember the old expression, a stitch in time saves nine. As with parenting, nothing could be more true. So what are we going for? We're going for setting limits and rules and boundaries. We're going for structure and routine. Now, I have next to that the word HALT, which if you've ever been in a 12-step program stands for hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. When kids have structure and routine, they don't tend to get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. For Alcoholics Anonymous, they tell people never let yourself get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired because that's the time when you're vulnerable to make a mistake. Same with our kids. When our kids have structure, routine, when they eat at the same time, when they go to bed at the same time, when they get up at the same time, when they brush their teeth at the same time, when they know what to expect, they feel right, they act right. Be with them in the moment. You remember how I said that screen time was a big problem? It's a problem for our kids, but it's really a problem for us as parents. We are just as bad, if not worse, because we have legitimate work reasons to be online a lot of the time. So when I say be with them in the moment, what I'm thinking of is research that tells us that adults are on their phone 4 to 5 hours every single day. If you think about what it was like when you were growing up, Your parents, yes, watch TV, and yes, they would be on the computer, but they weren't spending 4 to 5 hours a day on a cell phone. That's 4 to 5 hours a day that families are not connecting and talking to each other and actually being with each other. So when I tell parents your presence is the best present, I really mean that very sincerely. We have parents who are buying their kids tons of stuff, but not giving them the best gift of all, which is even just 10 minutes of your time and your attention every day. That's become a really hard thing. And of course, being proactive, helping our kids feel right so they can act right, socializing in the real world. Get to your church, get to Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, go to the community picnic, go to the stream cleanup or tour the new Josiah Henderson Museum. Do something with other people out in the real world. It doesn't have to cost a lot. You can go to the dog park, for example. That's free. Go to Cabin John Park. Get our kids off their screens and out in the real world where nobody is trying to manipulate their attention or sell things to them. Of course, limiting and supervising screen time. Also, this generation of kids is less independent. And part of that really is because us parents don't have a lot of time. Remember, I talked about how in The Simpsons, you had one parent, and that was Homer, who had a job outside of the home. And Marge was like my mother way back in the 80s because Marge was a full-time parent. We're trying to do all the parenting, all the housework, all the meal preparation, the laundry, the grocery shopping, the doctor's visits, when most of us couldn't possibly survive without two incomes. The idea of, one of the partners working just because they like to, that idea is kind of gone. We're working now because it's really expensive to live in Montgomery County. And because we have two parents who are working, there's very little time for teaching kids to do things like tie their shoes and mow the lawn and cook for themselves and do laundry. So our kids are tending to do less of those things because we just don't have time to teach them. And when we only have maybe an hour to spend with them, we're generally tired and we want to spend that time enjoying them or doing something fun together, not like, showing them how to take out the garbage. So this happens. It's not like we're bad parents. It's that we are reacting to social and cultural and economic forces that we have no control over. Of course, encouraging responsibility, encouraging chores, encouraging kids to make things right if they've made a mistake. If you can teach your kid anything in this world, it would be to try to make things right when you've made a mistake. Very important. And of course, our kids need to be moving and exercising and getting outside. As a psychologist, I see a lot of kids who are on medication, who have anxiety problems, who have school refusal problems. When I think to myself, if this kid just had, the real amount of playtime and exercise time that their body and brains need because they are a child, we could eliminate a lot of the academic problems that our kids are dealing with today. So here's a little secret. All families have conflict. There is not a single family out there, no matter how beautiful the family, no matter how big their house, no matter how many Teslas they have in the driveway, every single family has conflict. It's normal. It doesn't mean you're a bad parent or that your kids are bad kids. We all have conflict. The trick is how we manage it, because the conflict is never going away. Those of you who have been with the same romantic partner for a long time, you know this. It's all about how you don't solve your unsolvable problems, right? How you manage the day-to-day conflict of trying to live together. Our goal as parents is not to get rid of conflict and keep our kids happy all the time. Our goal is to reduce the intensity of negative affect during the conflict, right? We want to have the conflict happen, but not be toxic, not leave anybody in tears, not leave anybody screaming or with hurt feelings or with something they're going to talk about in therapy 2 decades later. Our other goal is to increase the amount of positivity during the non-conflict times. And how do we do that? We generally do things together. Things like raking the leaves together, or going grocery shopping together, or telling family stories, having a cup of tea together, walking the dog together. These things don't have to cost a lot of money, but we can do a lot of things to build into our day opportunities for just plain old, good old-fashioned connecting. So I am a big believer that parents have to be in charge. Now, does that mean you're an awful, draconian, authoritarian figure? No, but it means that your kids need firm boundaries. When I see kids who don't have boundaries, I see an unhappy kid. Everybody in this world needs to know what is okay to do, what is okay to say, how it's okay to act, and what things you shouldn't do. We are social animals, just like wolves. And wolves spend a lot of time raising their pups, teaching them, here's how you got to show respect. Here's how you share. Here's who you can play with. And here's when you have to listen. So when I say that parents need to be in charge, again, I don't mean that we mean to be mean, but our kids need to know that we are the ones who are in charge, because if we're in charge, we are keeping them safe. When kids don't know where the limits are, this is when we get kids who don't feel right and don't act right. And when kids don't know where the limits are, they keep pushing until they find out. So in terms of being a proactive parent, think to yourself, when we're done, maybe when you're in the shower or as you're falling asleep, think about for yourself, like, what are my actual boundaries? Like, what behaviors are kind of okay, maybe annoying kid behaviors, like maybe some bad language or leaving their socks on the floor. But what are the things that really, really matter to me? Where are my boundaries? And how can I communicate to my children in a healthy way? This is okay. This is not okay. One thing parents don't often realize is that the biggest thing that drives your child's behavior is actually your attention. We think a lot of times that kids' behavior, like if they're asking for a cookie when they shouldn't have it, or if they are sneaking a bike ride when they shouldn't, if they're sneaking screen time at night, we often think that they're after a specific thing, like that they're really after the cookie, for example. But what kids really care the most about, and I say this having worked with kids now since the mid 90s and having raised my own kids, your attention, you as the parent, your attention, either positive or negative, is the biggest motivation. This is really what kids care the most about. And here's the problem. As parents, we tend to ignore it when our kids are being good, when they're being quiet, when they do what they're told, when they're sitting in the back of the car reading. We don't pay a lot of attention to them. What we do as parents is, unfortunately, we pay the most attention to our kids when they are doing something that gets on our nerves, or we cannot ignore because it's not safe, something that's irritating or inappropriate. So we tend to, unfortunately, reinforce with our attention the things that we don't want our kids to do. And of course, the more you reinforce something, the more other people will do it. So I took this from Calvin and Hobbes, if there are any Calvin and Hobbes fans here, just to really kind of bring home this message. The mom in Calvin and Hobbes is really pretty famous for always having these big freakouts. But, basically whenever Calvin's doing anything good, she's reading a book. And that's kind of, I see myself there, because again, when my kids were playing quietly, I was catching up on work or reading a book or cleaning the kitchen or doing any of the other things. I had to deliberately force myself to pay attention when they were doing what I wanted them to do. So like I said, every family has conflict. It's normal. What we want to have is non-toxic conflict. We want to have the kind of conflict where we solve problems together, or maybe we don't solve problems together, but we manage to have getting angry without being insulting, and especially without losing control of our temper and doing something that we'll really regret later. Nobody pushes our buttons like our kids. It happens. But we want to have anger without insult. We want to be able to complain without criticizing people as people. So I can say to my kids, I don't like that there are dirty dishes in the sink. That's very different from saying, you guys are lazy slobs who never help out around the house. You guys are jerks. See the difference? I'll talk more about that. We got to have respect for feelings. Our kids need to honor us. A lot of religious texts tell us to honor our mother and father. The reason that that's been passed down through culture, through religion, through centuries, is because that respect for feelings, respect for parents, but also respect for our fellow human being is central. We will never solve a conflict with anyone if they don't feel like we respect our feelings. And of course, limits and boundaries. Boundaries being what's okay to do, what's not okay to do, and limits meaning if a kid crosses a line that's not okay, we as the parent are going to step in and take some kind of action to make sure that nothing bad happens, that that child doesn't make a serious mistake, hurt some feelings, or have some kind of really dangerous or unwanted consequences. For those of you who came late, I just want to let you know they're recording this. So if you missed the first 10 minutes, that is okay. If you have a burning desire to see it, you can. So now we're on to discipline. Now, people often associate discipline with punishment, but if you think about the word disciple, it comes from the word to teach. Discipline is about teaching. It's not about punishing. So when we're talking about raising our kids, we are constantly thinking about how do we teach them to be kind? How do we teach them to restrain themselves? How do we teach them to be good and caring and just members of society? And part of how we do that is, as parents, we have to learn to talk to the heart and not to the head. Remember, I said that when kids feel right, they act right. Kids' feelings are super duper important. Now, when I say their feelings are important, that doesn't mean we let them get away with everything. My kids will tell you they do not get to get away with everything, but I always respect what they were feeling or what I want to understand. What were you feeling that led you to make that mistake? What's going on with you emotionally where you didn't get your homework done? I definitely want to know about the feelings, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to permit any behavior to happen. Right? When my kids were little, I used to say you can be as angry as you want to be, but you can't do whatever you want to do. So what does that mean? Talk to the heart, not to the head. This means we need to stop being so logical with kids. As adults, we're very logical because we can be. And we tend to want to discuss things and negotiate. But that's not what we should be doing with kids. Kids are not little adults. We shouldn't be negotiating with them. We shouldn't be logicking them where we give them long explanations for why we have this or why we have these limits. What's really important for kids is to get a sense of their feelings, understand their feelings, and then help them work through a better solution than whatever mistake they happen to make. Here's 4 phrases that all of us as parents should get out of our vocabulary. Imagine for a second that you came home from work and your spouse, your husband, wife, significant other, whomever you live with, you had a really bad day. And imagine that person, after you go off about how you had this terrible day and you feel really bad, imagine that your spouse said, "Why don't you just? Have you tried? Can't you? Or you should." These 4 phrases really shut down conversation because what they basically say is, I know better than you, and this really isn't a hard problem. You're just too dumb to figure out a solution. So when we find ourselves talking to the head, right? The why don't you just, have you tried, can't you, and you should, we are talking to the head. We need to get out of that and talk about the feelings that were behind the behavior, that were behind the mistake, that were behind the loss of control. And so I have a little saying, name it and tame it. What really helps kids is if we as adults can try to name for them what they're feeling. Putting words to emotions helps kids a lot. It helps them develop their emotional vocabulary so that they have emotional granularity. So even our teenagers, sometimes they don't really know quite the difference between feeling frustrated versus when they have their feelings hurt, when they feel sad, when they feel angry. And a lot of times kids will act like jerks or they'll be really irritating or obnoxious, but what they're really feeling is sad or hurt. And we as the parents, we can be the wise ones who can help them understand and figure out what's really going on with them. So here's some examples of how you can use name it and tame it. So just acknowledging our human experience. If a kid comes home and let's say someone was mean to them at school, we could respond with how embarrassing, or oh, that must have hurt, or that sounds really stressful. Let's say you have a kid like mine, who does not like to take the garbage out. And so what my two teenage boys will do is they'll just stuff more and more stuff in the garbage, and they're very strong. So they can like force a lot of trash down in that garbage can until it weighs like 80 pounds. And I'm 5'2". I'm not lifting 80 pounds of garbage with my 50-year-old back. That is not happening. So what I try to say to them is like, I get it. The garbage stinks and it's heavy and you have to take it all the way out in the backyard. And okay, I hate taking out the garbage. I don't know anybody who likes taking out the garbage, but the garbage must go out. We can also say things about what happens in school that help them name it and tame it. So if a kid comes home and says, I hate my teacher, she's so mean, she gave me an F, she always does blah, 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 blah. Sometimes just listening to that and then saying something like, you really wish you had a different teacher. A lot of times you see kids relax in that moment. You're probably not going to change their teacher, but they may know just from you saying something like, you really wish you had a different teacher this year. They know you're on their side. Okay. Other times, kids are very surprised when they get in trouble, especially our kids with ADHD, our kids with other kinds of neurodiversity, our really rambunctious boys like I have at home. They often are just doing what they do, and they are super surprised when they get in trouble because they never meant to do anything wrong. Things just happen, especially when you have little boys who, and, a lot of little girls too, who really need to move their bodies and who find it very, very hard to sit still for 6 hours a day with one 20-minute recess. So sometimes for kids, when they get in trouble, you can just say to them, like, it sounds like you were really caught off guard, or it sounds like if you could go back, you wouldn't do it that way. Or it sounds like you just, maybe you were feeling kind of frustrated and it came out in like you swinging your backpack. These are all things that they don't excuse the behavior. They don't say like, yay, good for you. You swung your backpack and you whacked your friend in the face. But what they do is help the kid sort of step back a little bit and put some emotion words to their own experience so that they can calm down. So if you grew up when I did, you remember before Will Smith was a super famous movie star, he was kind of a teenage heartthrob, and he did this wonderful video called Parents Just Don't Understand. If you haven't listened to this since the 90s, go back and listen to it like from the parent perspective, because it really is fun to like go back and sort of take a look at that, not from the teenager perspective, but from the parent who like had their Porsche taken out and was trying to buy the kid, affordable clothes. When we bring up something that our kids don't want to hear, like when we have to say to them, hey, the garbage stinks and it's been sitting there for 2 days, or, hey, you missed 3 homework assignments, or, hey, what you just said hurt grandma's feelings. When we make a complaint like that, their first reaction is often kind of a jerky one. They might be impulsive or rude or dismissive or hostile. That's kind of okay, because nobody likes to get negative feedback. And kids, especially our kids with disabilities or neurodiversity, they get a lot of negative feedback. Our kids who are not the types who sit still very easily, or our kids who have a really hard time learning, they get tons and tons of negative feedback during the day. So if a kid responds to what you're saying by being impulsive, rude, dismissive, hostile, it doesn't necessarily mean they're intending to be oppositional. It might just be that their feelings are hurt, or they were caught by surprise, or they just need a little time to process what it is you're saying. So if you get a kid who gives you kind of an unwanted reaction when you bring up a problem, it's okay to just stop the conversation, step back, ask to start over, or sometimes say, okay, I can see you're not ready to talk about this. Why don't you come talk to me when you feel ready? And often they just need like 10 minutes to settle down and get their thoughts in order, stop being embarrassed. And then you can actually have a really decent conversation if you don't let them provoke you by being impulsive, rude, dismissive, or hostile. So as parents, we engage in a lot of talking to the head instead of the heart. And we also have kind of parenting habits that maybe our parents and grandparents passed down to us. These are things that we do that make our kids less cooperative. make them more interested in pushing back and less interested in listening and cooperating. And of course, we want the kids at the end of the day to listen and cooperate, even if they've made a mistake. So as parents, one thing we often do is called the harsh startup. This is from John Gottman's work, particularly us moms. So if you're a mom like me, you will often have something bothering you for a really long time before you say something. And by the time you say something about it, the overflowing garbage can, you might be like ready to pop. You may be like at yelling level of angry because you've probably been dropping hints or doing it yourself or waiting for, your spouse to back you up. So we tend to come in guns blazing with the harsh startup, and we land on these kids and we jump right in where we are like super enraged, and the kid hasn't been expecting this. So they will oftentimes respond, by being impulsive or hostile or dismissive in response to the fact that we opened up a conversation by kind of landing on them guns blazing. As parents, the more we criticize our kids instead of complaining about the behaviors we don't like, the more they're going to do that back to us. The more it becomes a fight where feelings are hurt and it gets really ugly and toxic. So remember, complain without criticizing. As parents, we often answer without listening. And if you remember Proverbs, answering without listening is shame and folly. When we answer without listening, that means that we are talking and we're not even listening to what the other person has to say. We don't want our kids to grow up to be the type of people who answer without listening, because we all know people like that, and they're not people you want to marry, and they're not people you want to have kids with yourself. So we as parents have to check that urge to just tell them stuff, right? We want to listen before we speak. And of course, we as parents, we moralize and we pontificate and we lecture. This was something our parents did to us. And I don't know about you, but even if I totally agreed with my parent, whatever they were saying, and I really wanted to agree with them and do better, as soon as the moralizing and lecturing and pontificating started, the natural response to that is that people get very defensive. People don't like to be lectured, even if they know full well that they are in the wrong. And punishment is another thing that we know from the research, that punishment instead of consequences is really not an effective way of managing behavior. We can set limits, we can set consequences. I get my kids doing what I really need them to do without using punishment just about every time. And of course, when we get in that zone where we as parents have had our feelings hurt, or we're angry, or we're stressed, and we resort to demeaning, insulting, teasing, this again becomes toxic. And we will all do this sometimes. But the trick is to stop yourself and say to your kid, wait a minute, I need a few minutes to collect myself because I'm not in a headspace where we can have a conversation about this. You can do that with your spouse too. This is an oldie but a goodie. This is from the 80s, and this is what's called Patterson's coercive cycle. What this is a cycle that we get into with kids where we make a request. So I'm at the top of the cycle now in the blue. We make a request, take the garbage out. The kid reacts with hostility. No, I'm busy. And then the adult can either react by screaming, yelling, losing our temper, getting really punitive. And sometimes what we do is we just feel like, I don't have time to deal with this. It's not worth it. I don't want to fight with my kid because I'm exhausted. Or how am I going to make him? That becomes really hard. And so we withdraw and the child doesn't do what was asked. And so a lot of times parents who come to see me or come to see other parenting experts, they're stuck in this cycle where they are trying to give their kids directions, but the kid's hostility is keeping this cycle where the kid's hostility and reaction is making us hostile and reactive, and no cooperation is happening. It's really hard to break out of this cycle. So here's the difference between consequences and punishments, right? Consequences work really well. A consequence does not mean we're tolerating the behavior, okay? I exert consequences all the time because the world exerts consequences all the time. You speed, you're going to get a ticket. You don't pay your taxes, you're going to get fines. As adults, we have so many things that we know if I don't do this or if I do this, I am not going to like the consequence. The sooner our kids understand that cause and effect relationship and the power of their choices, the better. Okay, so with consequences, an example of consequences would be like loss of privileges. You get a speeding ticket, you leave the car on empty, you do not have the privilege of driving. You misuse your phone, you sneak it into your bedroom at night, and I find you texting at 3 a.m. Guess what? I bought the phone, I own the phone, I will take the phone. Loss of access to the misused object, there's an example of that. And having to leave early. If a child is in a place where they are behaving inappropriately, it's time to go. And I'll often see this in the grocery store where I see the parent who has like 3 items in their cart, and very well that they have to pick up the whole week's worth of groceries. And they'll say to the kid, like, if you do that again, we are going home. But the kid knows full well that the parent has to do the grocery shopping. And so they can continue to nag about the candy or the donuts or the treats that they want because they know good and well the parent's not actually going to leave early. But if you as a parent are ready to make them leave the birthday party or take a break from the birthday party, to leave the grocery store, to actually move them away from the thing that they were being inappropriate around, that's a consequence. And one of my favorite consequences ever in this whole world is having to make amends. Every religious text and teaching on this whole planet teaches us the importance of making amends. It's not enough to just make a mistake and be sorry about it. You have to then go and do the work. This principle, if you're Jewish, of tikkun olam, you have to go and do the work for making things better when you have hurt someone, when you have made a mistake, because every religion understands that all of us are making mistakes. That's who we are as humans. The important thing is not so much, that you made a mistake or you made a bad choice, but are you willing to make amends? And so an example of that would be if my son forgot to take the garbage out, he would then take the garbage out and say, I'm sorry, Mom, I'll try to remember next time.
Tiniest crack in my screen ever. It's like
we had somebody with their mic off. So punishments are different. Punishments are actually when you are trying to inflict some sort of pain on the other person, and it doesn't have to be physical pain. It can be psychological pain or a lot of discomfort or displeasure. So the reason I say that punishments don't work is because we have about 50, more than that now. We have over 70 years of research that tells us that parents who primarily rely on punishments, the kids tend to get more aggressive. And over time, when your kid's 5, it's not such a big deal if they're aggressive. But if they're 15 and they're aggressive, it is a very big deal. You have to remember too, that at some point you will be more frail than your children. And in families where there was a lot of physical punishment, there's often elder abuse. So put that in your Wayback Machine. Punishments are things like physical pain, discomfort, spanking, hitting, slapping, pinching. All of these things, per the research, tend to increase aggression. When you show a kid that the bigger person can hurt the smaller person, as soon as they're the bigger person, they will hurt the smaller person, because that's what you've taught them. You've also taught them that getting physical is a perfectly appropriate way to solve problems. So whether you have strong feelings about physical punishments or not, you can't really argue with the fact that you are teaching them that getting physical and hurting somebody else's body or violating their body is, you're showing them that's a way of solving problems, which is counterproductive in the long run. Of course, yelling and intimidation, and also punishments that involve withholding food or sleep or comfort, bodily necessities, and also isolating people using seclusion, restraint, those sorts of more draconian things. They still happen a lot, and they still actually happen in our schools. So you should be really aware to talk with your kids about what the teachers and the staff are actually doing when somebody breaks the rules. You may find it very eye-opening. If you remember, I talked about complaining without criticizing. Here's ways that we can focus our kids' attention on the problem so that they will be more inclined to fix it. Okay. All of these things here are a way of expressing a complaint and also teaching kids about the consequences. So instead of, let's say I come home from work and the poor dog, this is not my dog, but I do have two dogs. And let's say that the poor dogs haven't been fed and nobody let them out. So not only are the dogs completely hungry, maybe they have an empty water bowl and they need to go to the bathroom desperately, and maybe one of them's even already had an accident. That for me is a situation that is going to really push a button, and I am going to be mad. But it's not helpful for me as a parent to come in and start screaming at the kids about how lazy and irresponsible and awful and mean they are, or maybe that I'm going to like give the dogs away. That's not productive. I want to focus my kids' attention on the problem and hopefully get them empathizing with the dogs. So the thing that I may do is come home, stand at the top of the staircase and yell, "The dogs haven't been fed. They need to go out." And that usually will get the thump, thump, thump of teenagers running down the stairs to take care of the dogs. Another way I can complain without criticizing, there are dirty dishes in the sink. That happens a lot when you have two teenage boys because they eat like locusts. There are dirty dishes in the sink. Another one might be, grandma could trip on these shoes. When my in-laws would come to visit and my kids would leave junk on the floor, it was a literal safety risk. So I needed them to understand, not you're lazy for leaving your shoes out, you're a slob, but here's why, because grandma could trip on these shoes. Food trash attracts bugs. You know, they try to eat in their rooms and they don't really think like, would you like to have mice and cockroaches in there? No, well then get the food trash out. A big one, if they have been fighting with each other, is helping them refocus on the problem, that they weren't empathizing and problem solving with each other. So saying things like, your brother's feelings were hurt, instead of, you are such a jerk to your brother, you're such a bully, blah, blah, blah. And one of my favorites that I use all the time, just a descriptor. These 3 missed assignments brought your grade down. And then close your mouth and wait for your teenager or your child to start thinking about what happened. Now, the reason I have Claire Huxtable up there is because I used to love The Cosby Show before we the awful truth about Bill Cosby. But I remember Claire Huxtable when she was, the mom. She always looked super glamorous, but her eyes could shoot daggers at her kids. Now, I'm not suggesting you parent like Claire Huxtable, but the thing I always respected about her is that nobody walked all over her and nobody disrespected her. So it is okay to own your own feelings and values around your kids. I noticed that a lot of kids now, especially post-pandemic, the way they talk to their parents does not show the honor thy mother and father. It doesn't show the respect. It doesn't even show the kind of respect that one child should have for another. So if kids hurt your feelings, it's okay to say, that hurt my feelings, because kids will hurt your feelings. They know how to push our buttons, and they're kids. A lot of times they will say things, about your weight, or, your hair, or, the fact that you're looking older, or, anything they could say to hurt your feelings. So-and-so's mommy is prettier than you are. Yeah. But kids need to know when they've hurt our feelings. It's really okay to share that with them. Your future son or daughter-in-law will thank you. Another thing you can say if your kid is arguing with you about something is, you can say, I see your point, but I'm not comfortable with that. If your kid wants to dye their hair blue and pierce their nose, maybe, but it's okay to say, I'm not comfortable with that if you're not comfortable with it. What I've learned from working with kids, and when I do testing with kids, I'm basically talking to them for like 6 hours. I get to hear how much they really care about what their parents think. They really want to know what your values and your beliefs are. They may act like they don't. They may act like, they want to tune you out, but get them alone in a room and they care very deeply about this, even if they don't agree with your values. They want to know about them and they want to know why you think that. So another one, of course, when I see a dirty kitchen after 8 p.m., I get furious. It's okay to tell your kids if something that they've done has made you angry. You want to express that you are furious or mad, because when you can express it with words like that, when I see a dirty kitchen after 8, I'm furious, that's a complaint. And it's a statement about what's happening with you. It is not a toxic insult. I'm not slapping them. I'm not telling them they're disgusting, filthy pigs who will never get married someday. I am owning it. And one of the big ones I like to use is, it's not a big deal to you, but it is to me and dad. I mean, in my family, we happen to have me and there is a dad. Kids will often say, like, it's no big deal. And this is that being dismissive in response to your complaint. And if the garbage has been sitting there for 2 days and it stinks and it weighs 80 pounds, it might not be a big deal to you, but it is a big deal to me because now I can't lift it. So just that simple phrase, it's not a big deal to you, but it is to me. That will carry you pretty far. Another one is, we expect you to try your best, even if you don't like the subject. Because a lot of times in middle and high school, if they don't like the subject, they don't like the teacher, they'll use that as an excuse to stop working and stop trying. And I don't care if my kids get straight A's or not, but I do care if they're not working hard and if they're not showing respect to the teacher and showing respect to themselves by putting forth effort. So we expect you to try your best. Again, it's not a personal insult, it's an expectation. So you see, it's a statement about what I expect to see, not you're a bad person, you're not smart, you're lazy. It bothers me to see you tease your sister, brother, cousin, whomever. And of course, one of my favorites, I asked for help and I didn't get it. That's not fair to me. Especially with my kids being teenagers now, I do expect them to take care of a lot of household chores. And if they don't, then I need to communicate that because they have to understand that they are part of a family and they're expected to contribute. So if I say to them, I asked for help and I didn't get it, they know that they better get off their backsides and do whatever it is, because I'm not a happy mom and nobody wants an unhappy mom to deal with. So now I'll give you a few examples. We're kind of coming to the end here. How do you actually put all of this together? Here's some sample conversations. So this one's about, how do you avoid toxic conflict? When you've got a topic that you really need to discuss with your kid, you start with the invitation. The invitation is the statement of the problem, and it's up there in blue. Invitation: may I speak with you about your homework? When is good for you? See, I'm actually approaching a kid here like I would a business colleague. When can we meet about this? Because your kid needs a little time to think sometimes. And my description, my complaint about the situation, here comes my complaint. I got an email about 3 missing math assignments. Ooh, that's not good, right? Teacher just emailed 3 missing math assignments. Now, just like I said in the Will Smith slide, if your kid hears this, they are instantly going to be embarrassed and frustrated and upset. And so they're going to want to say something to not feel that way anymore, right? So they may say, it's not my fault, that dumb teacher doesn't teach, I can't do stuff I haven't learned, it's a waste of my time, why do I need math anyway, I don't care, I hate math. Okay, they can vent, that's fine. You can then reflect back. Remember, we're name it and tame it now. So that sounds pretty awful, because it does. Nobody wants to be getting a bad grade in a class. Nobody wants their parent to come and say, like, hey, you're now in trouble and your teachers recognize something wrong. That's a crappy situation to be in. It's not pleasant getting negative feedback. The fact that your kid doesn't respond with, why, thank you, mother, is not surprising, because none of us likes to get negative feedback that makes us feel embarrassed or inadequate. So we can say something neutral, like, that sounds pretty awful, because it does. And then there's the ask. We need a plan for helping you get back on track. Give it some thought and let's meet at 8 to discuss. So I'm giving this kid some time to chew on this, to think about their responsibility in the matter. And most of all, what are we going to do about it? So then I'll have a meeting with a kid who's ready, or maybe I'll have a text meeting if that kid's not able to have a face-to-face about this particular issue because they're upset. We can pass notes, we can text, we can have a phone call, we can do a walk and talk. That's okay. But what we're going to be wanting to get out of this is some ideas for how we can fix this. And the kid might surprise you. They might come downstairs, half an hour later and say, I made up my 3 missing assignments. See, I was on top of it all the time. okay. But as long as you have a plan that both people agree and you're saying to your child, okay, I'll support you. Your child is saying, yes, I agree to follow through. You write to the teacher about the plan. Then you have avoided toxic conflict and you got what you wanted. Here's another example, non-toxic problem solving. Here's our invitation. May I speak with you about screen time? Ooh, loaded topic, right? When is good for you? Because I know this is going to be a minefield, right? Kids are very, very emotionally invested in their screens and they know they're using them too much. So my complaint, I'm worried you're spending so much time on your phone. Now the kid is probably going to vent. Remember, this is embarrassing. This is frustrating. And they don't want you to take their phone away. So they'll say something like, why, I'm happy. This is how I see my friends. You don't understand. If I'm not on my phone, I'm going to miss everything. Okay. So instead of arguing with them, well, I bought that stupid phone and I'll take it away. No, I'm going to pull back and I'm going to name it and tame it. I'm going to mirror. I'm going to say, getting to see your friends is really important. Of course it is. We can all relate to that. All of us as kids didn't want to be left out. We understand why they're on their phones too much, but we can't let that situation stay like that. Okay. And then there's the ask. We need to get a plan for making sure you connect with your friends, but you still get to bed on time and get your homework done. Give it some thought and let's meet tomorrow to discuss. I'm going to put this one off till tomorrow because this is really something I need this kid to take some time to think about. And when I meet with this kid, I might even say to them, hey, I want you to come up with 3 ideas that you and I can talk about when we meet. And we're going to write down a plan. We're going to either write it down, we're going to type it, we're going to agree to it, and then we are going to have like a formal plan for the new rules around screen time or phones. By all means, if you have a kid with a phone, take the phone into your bedroom at night or turn off the internet, take the tablet into your bedroom, problem solved, and you will be very, very grateful that you did that when they're teenagers. Let's say you're dealing with a kid who's made a really big mistake, which does happen. So let's imagine that this is a kid who went out when they weren't supposed to and went to the park and you didn't know where they were and you were absolutely terrified because you couldn't find them. That's a big deal, right? So after you get to the point where you feel like you could have a conversation, your invitation is, you're not necessarily calm, but may I speak with you about what happened tonight when is good for you? And then the complaint, we were scared when we couldn't find you. See, I'm going to own my feelings there because as every parent knows, when you can't find your kid, it is terrifying and it makes you so angry at the same time. So then you're going to listen because your kid is going to feel embarrassed. They know they did something wrong. And so they're going to fire off with trying to tell you why you shouldn't feel that way. I was at the park. I was with a bunch of friends and nobody else has a stupid baby curfew like I do. Isn't it amazing how we're the only parents in the world who have curfews for our kids? It seems like all these other parents don't, at least in our children's mind. Everyone else's parents were fine with it. I doubt that's true. Can I still go to the game on Friday? Everyone is walking back to Kim's for a sleepover afterward. So that's a pretty provocative statement. And you'd be very tempted at that point to like lose your you-know-what on your precious child. But you have to force yourself to step back and try to understand a little bit. So you were having a good time and you didn't want to have to come home. But I'm not going to let that business about, can I go to the game on Friday and then sleep over at the friend's house after they've just made this big mistake. So what I'm going to come back with is, I expect you to ask before you go out, and I'm not sure I'm ready to trust you yet again. So this is a consequence, right? Because going to the game and going to a friend's for a sleepover, these are privileges that I, as the parent, can choose to give or not give. It's up to me as the parent. And if I'm feeling like this kid is needing some time to think about what they did and the consequences, I don't think I would be letting them go to that sleepover. So in terms of making amends, remember I said making amends is really important because when you make a mistake, you absolutely have to do something to fix it. It could be a heartfelt apology. It could be a letter to you about how they're never going to do it again. It could be agreeing to do some extra chores or to call you, like at 6 p.m. It doesn't matter so much what it is and whether it fully makes amends, but it has to feel to the child or the teenager like they are taking concrete action to try to make the situation right and show you that they can earn your trust back. So again, We're going to communicate feelings. We're going to clarify the rules and the boundaries, like you may not go out without permission. You must be back by sunset, whatever your rules and boundaries are. And then you take some time and actually put an agreement in writing. It helps a lot because, again, sometimes kids genuinely do forget what the rules are, or they sort of BS to themselves like, oh, the sun isn't quite down yet. I can still be out. Kids fudge, and that's okay. But coming up with an actual plan of action so that you both know what the expectations are is about being proactive so you don't have to be reactive. So to sum up, managing undesirable behavior is uncomfortable. It's work. It's not pleasant. It's so much easier just to give in. It's so much easier, at least when they're young, just not to have any rules, or to keep buying them whatever they want, or to keep letting them be on screens all day or eat donuts 24/7. In those early days, it's so easy to give in. But parenting is like farming. You're going to find out what you planted while a child was a child when the teenage years come around, because that's when you will actually see the harvest. You're going to know if you did a good job if you have teenagers who are making a reasonable attempt to try to respect you and respect the rules of the household. So it's okay that it's uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. So here's your do's. Do listen to feelings. Do catch your kids being good. You really want to give them your attention when they're doing good things and pro-social things and desirable things and being quiet. Do set boundaries. Make sure your kids understand what the boundaries are. They don't have to like them, but you want to clarify what those boundaries are, what the limits are, what the curfew is, what the privileges are. Be proactive as much as you can. Remember, nobody's at their best when they are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Try to make sure your kid's getting enough sleep, enough exercise, enough playtime, enough healthy food. This will go a long way towards having a kid who feels right and acts right. And of course, enforce responsibilities. Every kid, no matter how little, has, well, maybe not a baby, but they all have something that they can do to contribute to the household, even if it's just helping to brush their teeth or, putting their toys in the bin. Having chores and responsibilities when they're little kids means that they're not going to push back so much when they're teenagers. It will just be part of what they do. Don't rush to fix things and make your child happy all the time. It's okay if your child's unhappy with a situation, as long as they feel heard, as long as you're talking to the heart, not the head. Don't reinforce only undesirable behavior. Don't only pay attention to your kid when they're doing something obnoxious, because then they will do more of the obnoxious thing. Do not let your kids say mean things to you. If every now and then it happens and it's an accident, it's a slip, we're all human. That's part of being human. But accepting a kid who is insulting you, berating you, deliberately saying hurtful things to you or to their elders or to their relatives, their siblings, don't let them make that part of who they are, because kids don't feel good when they're hurting other people, because that means that if they can hurt other people, then other people can hurt them. And no kid feels safe when they're acting like a jerk to other people and getting away with it. Don't just be reactive, right? Don't just punish or have consequences. Try to think in terms of, how can I make sure that my kid is positioned for success, so that doing what is right will come more naturally and it won't be such a struggle to them. And please don't become your child's servant. I see this so much with our working families where the parents have so little time with the child that when they see the child, when they're spending that hour with them or that vacation time where the parent is trying so desperately to connect and have fun with the child, that the child is acting like a little prince or princess and just bossing the parents around. Remember, kids really aren't happy when they can boss their parents around. They want to know that you're the parent and you're going to keep them safe by setting limits. One last thought. If you take away nothing else from tonight, remember, when kids feel right, they act right. So if you have a child who's running into a lot of obstacles, who's really having trouble meeting your behavior expectations or the expectations at school, this is a sign that something's wrong. So it's a great time to go to your guidance counselor, to go to a clergy person, a wise person that you know who's raised a lot of kids, maybe a psychologist, psychotherapist, pastoral counselor. seek some wisdom from somebody who's very trustworthy, and really talk this out with them, because parenting can be very, very lonely when you think that everyone else in the world is perfect, and it really does take a village.